The pump clicked off at $32.47. I pulled the receipt from the slot, already calculating how much gas I had left in my bank account before Friday. Then I heard it, a quiet, almost embarrassed voice behind me. "I'm sorry, sir. It's just $1 short." I turned around. The man at the counter was wearing a faded jacket with patches I couldn't quite read. His hands trembled slightly as he counted out crumpled bills. The cashier sighed, already reaching for the card machine. I didn't think. I just stepped forward, tapped my card, and said, "Put it on mine." That single dollar changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but I had just opened a door I wasn't prepared to walk through. If you've ever made a small choice that later turned out to be life-changing, you already know how heavy the air feels right before everything shifts. The gas station sat on the edge of a stretch of highway that cut through dry brush and forgotten billboards. It was the kind of place people only stop when they have no other option. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over cracked asphalt and faded tire tracks. I filled my tank in silence, watching the numbers roll upward in the rearview mirror. I was tired, not just from the drive, but from the weight of months that had been slowly draining me. Work had been inconsistent. My apartment lease was up in 30 days. I kept telling myself I was fine, but my chest felt tight every time I opened an email. I told myself I was just passing through, just grabbing gas, just trying to survive another week. But life has a way of interrupting your routine when you least expect it. The veteran's name was Elias. I didn't learn that until later. At the counter, he just nodded to me, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't usually ask, I just forgot to pull out the cash." I shrugged it off. "It's $1, don't worry about it." He finally looked up. His face was lined, not from age alone, but from years spent in places where the sun didn't set and the cold didn't leave. He wore a faded cap with a small emblem stitched near the brim. I didn't recognize it, but I knew enough to recognize the posture of someone who had carried heavy things for a long time. His shoulders were straight, but his hands still shook. I paid for my coffee, nodded again, and walked out into the humid Texas evening. Tell me honestly, would you have done the same if you were barely holding on yourself? I didn't think much of it after that night. I drove home, paid my bills, and tried to sleep. But something about Elias stayed with me. Maybe it was the way he said thank you. Not like a polite reflex, but like he meant it. Like that dollar actually mattered. I've spent most of my life measuring kindness in grand gestures. I thought real help required money, time, or sacrifice. But standing at that counter, watching a man count crumpled bills with shaking fingers, I realized how wrong I was. Sometimes kindness is just a moment, a pause, a single dollar when someone else is drowning in cents. I turned the thought over in my head as I lay awake, listening to the hum of my old refrigerator. I told myself it was just a passing moment. I didn't expect it to echo. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail I didn't recognize. A calm, professional voice left a message asking me to return a call regarding a personal matter. No name, no company, just a number and a request to call back before noon. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the dial button. I almost deleted it. Scams are everywhere. People pretend to be officials, pretending to owe you money or offering prizes that don't exist. But something about the tone stopped me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't demanding. It was quiet, respectful, almost cautious. I called back. A woman answered on the second ring. "Thank you for returning our call. May I ask who I'm speaking with?" I gave my name. She paused, then said, "Mr. Hayes, this call is regarding an interaction you had at a service station near County Route 9 last evening." My stomach dropped. I hadn't given my name. I hadn't even spoken it out loud. "How do you have my number?" I asked. "It was provided through a secure reference chain," she replied smoothly. "I'm not at liberty to explain the full protocol, but I can tell you that your action did not go unnoticed. There is a gentleman who would like to speak with you. Are you available to meet tomorrow at 1400 hours? I swallowed hard. "Meet? Who is this?" "That will be explained upon arrival. Please arrive at the address I'm sending to your phone. Dress comfortably. And sir, thank you." If you've ever felt the ground shift beneath you without warning, you know exactly how my hands felt gripping that phone. I spent the rest of the day pacing. I checked my mail, my inbox, my social media. Nothing. No threats, no requests, no news stories, just a quiet grow. Wing unease that wouldn't settle. I packed a jacket, made sure my car was fueled, and drove to the address she texted. It wasn't a corporate office. It wasn't a government building. It was a quiet residential street lined with oak trees and manicured lawns. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac had a stone driveway and a black iron gate. A guard stood near the entrance, wearing a crisp uniform that caught the sunlight. I rolled down my window. He checked my ID, nodded, and opened the gate. I parked in the circular driveway. Before I could even step out, the front door opened. A man stepped onto the porch. He wasn't old, but he carried himself like someone who had lived through decades in a single breath. His uniform was immaculate. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. My breath caught. I had seen those insignia on television, in news broadcasts, in documentaries about military leadership. But seeing them in person on a man standing in front of a suburban house felt surreal. He walked down the steps, his posture rigid but not unkind. He stopped a few feet away and extended his hand. "You must be the young man who covered the gap," he said. His voice was calm, measured, like water flowing over stone. I shook his hand. It was firm, steady, nothing like Elia's trembling fingers. I don't understand," I managed. "Why am I here?" He smiled faintly. "Because you did what most people wouldn't, and because Elia's asked me to find you." "Tell me, have you ever wondered if your smallest actions actually ripple outward?" He invited me inside. The house was quiet, filled with books, framed photographs, and polished wood. It felt lived in but restrained. We sat in a study with leather chairs and a low table. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and set one in front of me. "Elias is my older brother," he began. I blinked. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier. "He served in 3 conflicts. He walked away with honors, but also with scars that don't show on the outside. He's been struggling. Not with money exactly, with purpose. With the quiet aftermath of a life spent serving others. He came to Dallas to visit our parents' old home. He stopped at that station because his car was running low. He was tired. He forgot the cash, and you stepped in." I stared at the coffee in my hands. "It was just $1, I said. "It was never just $1, he replied. "It was a signal, a reminder that people still see each other. That kindness hasn't been completely erased by cynicism." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt tight again, but this time it wasn't from anxiety. It was from the weight of being seen. "Why bring me here?" I asked. "Because Elias wanted to thank you in person," he said. "And because I wanted to ask you a question." He leaned forward slightly. "What made you do it?" I thought about it, the fluorescent lights, the tired man, the crumpled bills, the way I had almost kept walking. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I just saw someone struggling." And I remembered what it felt like to be the one who needed help. I didn't want him to feel small over $1. The general nodded slowly. "That's the exact answer he hoped for." If you've ever doubted whether your quiet choices matter, listen closely to what happens next. He stood and walked to a shelf. He pulled down a small wooden box and set it on the table. Inside was a folded letter, a silver coin, and a photograph of 2 young men in uniform standing side by side in front of a desert landscape. "Elias wrote this," the general said. "He asked me to deliver it. He also asked me to give you this." He handed me the coin. It was heavy, engraved with a motto I couldn't read. "It's a challenge coin," he explained. "Given to those who prove they understand the weight of service. Not in uniform, in character." I ran my thumb over the edge. It felt real, solid, like something that couldn't be faked. I opened the letter. Elia's handwriting was uneven but deliberate. "Thank you for not looking away. I've spent years trying to prove my worth. Sometimes I forget it's not about what I carry. It's about who sees me. You saw me. That's enough." I set the letter down, my vision blurred. I wiped my eyes quickly, embarrassed, but the general didn't look away. "You're wondering why this matters," he said gently. "It matters because the world is full of people who are tired, who are carrying invisible weights, who are one missed connection away from giving up. You didn't know his name, you didn't know his story, but you chose to pause. That pause is rare, and it changes things." I nodded slowly. I didn't think it was a big deal." "That's exactly why it is," he replied. "The moment you stop measuring kindness by its size is the moment you start understanding its power. Tell me honestly, when was the last time you let yourself be kind without expecting anything back?" The meeting lasted longer than I expected. We talked about duty, about the cost of sile, NCE, about how people in uniform are trained to carry burdens without complaint and how that same training sometimes makes it hard for them to ask for help when they're off the field. He told me about Elia's deployments, about the nights he didn't sleep, About the brother he watched change slowly over years of quiet sacrifice. I told him about my own struggles, the job losses, the doubts, the feeling that I was running out of time to figure things out. He listened, not like a superior, like a man who understood that everyone carries something. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "Don't underestimate what you did," he said, "and don't stop seeing people. The world needs more of that, less judgment, more pause." I nodded. "I will," he smiled. "Good, because Elias is waiting to thank you properly, and I think you'll want to hear what he has to say." I drove home in silence. The sky was turning orange, the kind of color that makes you feel both small and connected at the same time. I kept the challenge coin in my pocket. It felt like an anchor. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my life would suddenly change direction. But I knew one thing. I had been handed a mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. If you've ever felt like your life is moving too fast to notice the quiet moments, take a breath. This next part is where everything shifts. 3 days later, my phone rang again. This time, the voice was familiar. It was Elias. "Hey," he said, "I hope I'm not calling too late." I laughed softly. "Not at all, I was actually hoping to hear from you." We met at a small diner near the highway. He wore a clean shirt, his cap set neatly on the table beside him. His hands were steadier now. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Thank you." Just those 2 words, but they carried years. I nodded. "You're welcome, I really just." I didn't think twice. He smiled. "That's why it mattered. People who think twice usually find reasons not to act. You didn't." We ordered coffee. We talked. Not about war, not about medals, about life. About the strange ways people drift apart and find each other again. He told me he was volunteering at a veterans outreach center. He was helping others navigate the same quiet struggles he had faced. "I used to think my service ended when I left the uniform," he said. "Turns out it just changed shape." I listened, feeling something shift inside me. I had spent so much time chasing stability, trying to prove I was enough, trying to outrun my own doubts. But sitting across from a man who had carried the heaviest kind of responsibility and still chose to extend grace, I realized how much energy I was wasting on fear. "You've given me a lot to think about," I said. He nodded. "Good. Thinking is how we grow, but don't just think. Act, even when it's small, especially when it's small." We parted with a handshake. His grip was firm now, no tremor, just presence. I walked back to my car, the evening air cool against my skin. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation was the beginning of something I couldn't have planned. Tell me, have you ever met someone who quietly changed your direction without even trying? A week later, I received an invitation. It wasn't formal, just a handwritten note slipped under my door. "Come to the community center on Saturday at 10, where whatever feels right. Bring your coin, you'll understand why." I showed up early. The room was filling with people, not just veterans, families, teachers, neighbors, people who had been quietly supporting each other for years. At the front of the room stood Elias and the general. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were just 2 men standing in a room full of others who had decided to show up. The general stepped forward. "We're here today to recognize quiet service," he said. "Not the kind that makes headlines. The kind that happens in gas stations, in coffee shops, in living rooms. The kind that asks nothing but gives everything." He looked at me. "This young man reminded us that humanity doesn't disappear. It just waits to be noticed." My chest tightened. I hadn't expected to be part of any ceremony. I hadn't asked for recognition. But as people turned to look at me, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about the idea. The idea that $1, one moment, one choice can ripple outward in ways we can't control. Elias stepped forward. He handed me a small plaque. It read, "For seeing what others missed, for choosing pause over pass, for reminding us that kindness is never small." I held it in my hands. It felt heavy, not from weight. From meaning. I looked up. The room was quiet. No applause, just presence. And in that silence, I understood something I had spent years avoiding. I didn't need to be extraordinary to matter. I just needed to be awake. If you've ever felt like your life lacks purpose, listen closely. Purpose isn't found. It's chosen. The months that followed changed my routine, but not in the way I expected. I didn't suddenly become wealthy. I didn't land a dream job. I didn't fix all my problems overnight. But I started paying attention. I started pausing. I started asking myself, before walking away, what if they need this more than I need to keep moving? I volunteered at a local food pantry. I started checking in on neighbors I had never spoken to. I stopped measuring my worth by my bank account and started measuring it by my presence. And slowly, the tightness in my chest began to ease. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally living in alignment with something real. Elias and I kept in touch, not constantly, but consistently. We traded stories. We shared quiet victories. We talked about the days that felt heavy and the days that felt light. He told me about a young veteran who had almost given up until someone bought him a meal and listened. I told him about a coworker who was struggling and how I stayed late to help them finish a project. We didn't keep score. We just kept showing up. And that was enough. The general occasionally sent short notes. Nothing dramatic, just reminders. Stay present. Stay kind. The world needs more of you. I kept them in a drawer, not as trophies, as anchors. Tell me honestly, how many times have you walked past a moment because you were too busy to notice? One evening, I found myself back at that same gas station. The lights still buzzed. The asphalt still cracked. The world hadn't changed much, but I had. I filled my tank. I bought a coffee. I stood by the counter watching a woman count out change for a bottle of water. She was short by $2. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward. "Put it on mine," I said. She looked up, surprised, then relieved. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. "Don't worry about it." I walked out into the cool night air. The sky was clear. The stars were sharp. I didn't need a ceremony to feel proud. I didn't need recognition to feel whole. I just needed to know I was still paying attention. That's when I realized something I'll carry for the rest of my life. We spend so much time waiting for the big moments to define us. We wait for promotions, for headlines, for perfect timing. But life isn't built on grand gestures. It's built on quiet choices. On the dollar you give when you're barely holding on the pause you take when you're in a hurry, on the moment you decide to see someone instead of looking through them. Elias taught me that. The general reminded me. And that gas station proved it. If you've ever doubted whether your kindness matters in a world that feels indifferent, hear this clearly. It does. Not because of what it gives you, but because of what it refuses to take away. Your humanity, your presence, your capacity to choose grace when it would be easier to walk away. I still have the coin, I still have the letter, I still have the plaque. But what I really carry is a simple truth. You don't need to be powerful to make a difference. You just need to be awake and willing. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more pauses, more dollars given without expectation, more hands reached out without condition, more moments where we choose to see each other exactly as we are. Sometimes the smallest act is the loudest echo. Sometimes the quietest choice changes the trajectory of a life. Sometimes stopping for $1 means starting a chain reaction you'll never fully see, but you'll feel it, in the tightness leaving your chest, in the weight lifting from your shoulders, in the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. Tell me, what's one small choice you've been avoiding that might just change everything? I don't know where my path leads from here. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know this. I will keep pausing. I will keep seeing people. I will keep giving that dollar, that moment, that breath of grace. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because the world is full of Elias, full of people carrying invisible weights, full of moments waiting to be noticed. And if I can be the one who stops, who looks, who acts, then I've already lived a life worth remembering. Sometimes losing people isn't a loss. It's the beginning of finally finding yourself. Sometimes gaining nothing is the moment you realize you already have everything. And sometimes, stopping for $1 at a forgotten gas station outside Dallas is the exact moment your life begins to make sense. The coin felt heavier in my pocket the next time I drove past that stretch of highway. I told myself it was just metal, just an engraved piece of silver meant to sit in a drawer or hang on a keychain. But every time my fingers brushed it against the fabric of my jacket, my chest tightened. Not from guilt, from anticipation. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I only knew that life had stopped feeling like a straight line. It had become a series of quiet intersections, and I was still standing at the edge of the last one. That's when my phone buzzed. A single text from a number I hadn't seen before. "Meet me at the old bridge. 10 a.m. Come alone. Bring the coin." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovered. I didn't ask questions, I just put the car in drive. If you've ever felt the quiet pull of something bigger than yourself, You already know how my hands gripped that steering wheel. The old bridge sat where the city's edge met the tree line, a rusted steel structure that hadn't seen traffic in over a decade. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete. The river below moved slow and dark, catching the morning light in thin, silver ripples. I parked a quarter-mile back and walked the rest of the way. The air was cool, damp with dew, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. I didn't see him at first. Then I noticed the figure leaning against the railing, back turned, shoulders wrapped in a dark coat. I stopped a few feet away. "Elias," he turned slowly. His face looked different, not older, not tired, just focused, like a man who had finally stopped running from a conversation he'd been having with himself for years. "You came," he said. I nodded. "You said to bring the coin." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The wax seal on the back was cracked, already broken. "I didn't give this to you last time," he said quietly, "because I wasn't ready, and because you weren't ready to hear what's inside." I took it. The paper felt rough, heavy. "What is it?" I asked. He looked out at the water. "A promise and a warning." "Tell me honestly, would you open something like that if you knew it might change how you see everything?" I didn't open it right away. I held it against my chest, feeling the weight of words I hadn't read yet. Elias stepped back from the railing. "My brother didn't tell you the whole truth," he said. "About why he brought you to that house, about why I'm asking you to be here now." I frowned. "He said it was about kindness, about pause." "It was," Elias replied. "But kindness doesn't exist in a vacuum, it's a spark, and sparks need oxygen to become fire." He turned to face me fully. His eyes were sharp, clear, stripped of the hesitation I'd seen at the gas station. "There's a program, not run by the military, not funded by the government, built by people who served. People who came back and realized the hardest battles start when you take the uniform off. We call it the Anchor Initiative. It's not a charity, it's a network. We find the ones falling through the cracks, the ones who don't ask for help, the ones who think asking means weakness." He paused. "You stepped in for $1. You didn't know my name, you didn't know my history, but you saw me. That's the exact quality we've been looking for." I swallowed hard. "Looking for what?" "Someone who can stand in the gap," he said. "Not with money, with presence, with the willingness to sit in the quiet with people who have forgotten how to speak." I felt the ground shift beneath me, not dramatically, just enough to make me aware I was standing on something new. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you don't perform kindness," he said. "You practice it, there's a difference. People who perform want to be seen. People who practice don't care if they are. We need practitioners." He tapped the envelope in my hand. "That letter is from a man named Marcus. He served 2 tours. He came back with a mind full of noise and a heart full of silence. He's been sleeping in his car for 11 months. He doesn't take calls. He doesn't answer doors, but he reads letters, and he responds to coins. We leave challenge coins at places he frequents. It's a signal, a way to say, we see you. You're not alone. But the last one we left, he didn't pick it up. We think he's done looking for signals." I stared at the envelope. "You want me to deliver this?" "I want you to decide if you will," he corrected. "Because once you step into this, it stops being about a single moment. It becomes a responsibility. And responsibility isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes it asks you to sit with people who won't thank you. Sometimes it asks you to keep showing up when it feels like nothing is changing. If you've ever stood at the edge of a choice that felt too big to hold, listen closely to what happens next." I opened the envelope right there, leaning against the rusted bridge railing. The paper inside was thick, folded twice. Marcus's handwriting was tight, controlled, like every word had been wrestled into place. "I don't know who will find this. I don't know if I still believe it matters, but if you're reading it, someone saw me. And I need you to know this, I'm not broken. I'm just tired. And if you're willing to sit with tired, I'm willing to try again." I read it twice. My throat tightened. I folded it carefully, slid it back into the envelope and looked at Elias. "Where is he?" I asked. 3 miles south, near the old rail yards. He moves every few nights, but he's got a pattern. He stops where the streetlights still work. He stays where the ground is flat. He avoids crowds. He avoids noise." He handed me a small map, drawn in pencil. "He's here tonight and tomorrow. If he doesn't show up by the 3rd night, he's gone. We lose track. We try again somewhere else, but I don't want to lose him." I took the map. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from the sudden, sharp realization that I was being handed a thread. And if I pulled it, it would either lead me to a man drowning in silence, or it would pull me under with him. "Tell me, Have you ever been handed a responsibility you didn't ask for, but knew you couldn't walk away from? I spent the afternoon preparing, not with supplies, not with plans, with myself. I drove to a quiet park, sat on a bench, and just breathed. I thought about my own moments of quiet collapse. The nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was failing everyone, including myself. The days I smiled through conversations that felt like walking on glass. I realized I hadn't been helping people out of strength. I'd been helping them because I recognized the shape of my own exhaustion. And maybe that was enough. Maybe recognition was the first step toward rescue. I packed a thermos of coffee, 2 sandwiches, a clean blanket, and the envelope. I didn't bring a phone charger. I didn't bring a notebook. I brought only what I could carry without feeling like I was trying to fix someone. I left my car near the rail yards as dusk settled. The sky turned bruised purple, then deep blue. The air grew cold. I followed the map, stepping carefully over cracked pavement and scattered gravel. I didn't call out. I didn't search frantically. I just walked slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. Then I saw him, sitting beneath a flickering street lamp back against a concrete pillar, knees pulled to his chest. He wore a worn jacket, boots scuffed at the toes, a duffel bag resting beside him like a loyal dog. His face was hidden in shadow, but his posture told the whole story. Shoulders curved inward, head slightly bowed, breathing slow, measured. I stopped 20 feet away. I didn't move closer. I just set the thermos on the ground, placed the blanket beside it, and set the envelope on top. I took 3 steps back, and I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The wind picked up, carrying the distant hum of a freight train. I watched his hands. They twitched, then stilled, then reached forward, slowly, carefully. He picked up the envelope, opened it, read it. His shoulders dropped just an inch, but it was enough. He looked up. His eyes met mine. No words, just a nod. I nodded back. I sat on a rusted metal crate across from him. I didn't speak. I just let the silence stretch. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to exist. Space to be tired without apology. If you've ever sat with someone who couldn't find the words, you know how loud quiet can actually be. He finally spoke. His voice was rough, unused. "You're not from the center." I shook my head. "No, I'm just someone who was asked to pass something along." He looked at the envelope. "Marcus," he said, not a question, a confirmation. "Yes," he exhaled slowly. I didn't think they'd keep looking. "They will," I said, "as long as you're still here." He laughed softly. It was a dry, broken sound, but it was real. "I'm not sure I am. Sometimes I feel like a ghost haunting my own life." I didn't offer a platitude. I didn't tell him it would get better. I just said, "Ghosts don't drink coffee or read letters or sit under streetlights waiting to see if someone notices them. You're here, that's not nothing." He looked at me for a long time. Then he reached for the thermos, poured a cup, handed it to me first. I took it. We sat in the cooling dark, drinking in silence, watching the street lamp buzz and flicker. I didn't ask his story. I didn't push. I just stayed. And slowly the tension in his frame began to unravel. Not all at once. In pieces, a dropped shoulder, a deeper breath, a hand unclenching. By midnight, he spoke again. "I used to think asking for help meant I failed." I nodded. "I used to think offering help meant I had to fix it. I was wrong." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, we were both wrong." "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you let yourself just sit with someone instead of trying to solve them?" We met 3 nights in a row. Each time I brought the same things: coffee, a blanket, presents. Each time he spoke a little more, not about war, not about trauma, about the small things he missed: the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of a screen door closing, the weight of a dog resting on his feet. He told me about the nights he drove until his eyes burned, searching for a place that felt like it belonged to him. He told me about the days he stood outside shelters, watching people laugh, wondering if he'd forgotten how. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to steer the conversation toward hope. I just let it be what it was: heavy, real, honest. And on the 4th night, he handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a second challenge coin, older, scratched, engraved with a different motto. "My brother gave me this," he said, "before he deployed. Said it was for when I needed to remember who I was. I lost it years ago, found it in a coat pocket last week, figured it was time to pass it on." I took it. It felt warm from his hands. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you didn't try to pull me out of the dark," he said. "You just sat in it with me. That's rarer than you think." I closed the box. My chest felt full, not with pride, with purpose, quiet, steady, unshakable. If you've ever felt like you're carrying too much alone, hear this. You're not. But sometimes you have to let others carry a little of it too. A week later, Elias called, not to check on Marcus, to check on me. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I paused. "I'm tired, but it's a good tired, like I've been running a race I didn't know I was training for." He chuckled softly. "That's how it starts. The weight doesn't disappear, you just learn how to stand under it." We talked about the program, about the others they were tracking, about the quiet network of people who left coins, notes, meals, and silence in places where no one else looked. "We're not a rescue team," Elias said. "We're a reminder team. We remind people they're still here, that they still matter, that they don't have to earn the right to be seen." I thought about that, about how much energy I'd wasted trying to earn my own place in the world, about how many doors I'd knocked on that never opened, about how many times I'd mistaken silence for rejection. "What happens when they're ready to step forward?" I asked. "We walk with them," he said. "Not ahead, not behind, beside. We help them find housing, work, counseling, community, but only when they're ready. We don't pull, we don't push, we just stay." I closed my eyes. "I want to stay." "Then you already are," he replied. "Tell me, have you ever realized that showing up is the bravest thing you can do?" The months that followed weren't linear. They were messy. Some nights I found Marcus waiting. Some nights I found empty space and a note saying "gone fishing, back tomorrow." Some nights I found him angry, closed off, unable to speak. I didn't take it personally. I just adjusted. I brought less. I spoke quieter. I stayed longer. I learned that presence isn't a performance. It's a practice. And like any practice, it requires repetition. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to sit with discomfort without flinching. I started volunteering with the Anchor Initiative formally, not as a leader, as a listener. I visited other sites. I met other men and women who had served, who had returned, who had quietly disappeared into the margins of a world that moved too fast to notice them. I didn't try to fix them. I just sat with them. I brought coffee. I brought blankets. I brought silence when they needed it. And slowly, I watched something remarkable happen. People began to speak, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. They shared their fears, their regrets, their small victories, their quiet hopes. And I realized that healing doesn't always look like recovery. Sometimes it just looks like someone finally feeling safe enough to exhale. If you've ever doubted whether your presence matters in a room full of broken people, listen closely to what happens next. One evening, I arrived at the rail yards to find Marcus gone. No note, no blanket, just an empty space beneath the street lamp. My stomach dropped. I checked the usual spots. I called Elias. He didn't answer. I drove the perimeter, searching streetlights, alleys, overpasses. Nothing. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, breathing slowly. I told myself not to panic. I told myself he was just moving. But the silence felt different this time. Heavier. Final. I stayed until midnight. Then I drove home. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the 2 challenge coins resting on the wood. One from Elias, one from Marcus, both heavy, both real, both reminders of a choice I hadn't regretted once. At dawn, my phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Got a room, first night in 11 months. Slept through the alarm, woke up confused, then remembered. Thank you for sitting in the dark with me. I'll call you when I'm ready to step into the light. I read it 3 times. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes, laughed softly, and leaned back in my chair. The tightness in my chest was gone, replaced by something steady, something quiet, something that felt like peace. Tell me honestly, how many times have you mistaken silence, or failure instead of preparation? I didn't stop showing up. If anything, I showed up more intentionally. I stopped measuring progress by milestones. I started measuring it by moments. The moment someone made eye contact. The moment someone accepted a cup of coffee without hesitation. The moment someone said "I'm tired" and didn't follow it with an apology. I learned that healing isn't a destination. It's a direction. And sometimes, the only way forward is to sit still long enough to realize you're already moving. Elias and his brother continued to lead the network, but they stepped back from direct outreach, trusting the practitioners to carry the weight. They didn't hand us scripts. They handed us space. And in that space, I found a version of myself I hadn't known existed. Not a hero. Not a savior, just a person who finally understood that kindness isn't about fixing broken things. It's about honoring the cracks. If you've ever felt like your life is too small to matter, take a breath. This next realization will change how you see everything. I used to think impact required visibility. I thought if no one saw what I did, it didn't count. But sitting in those quiet spaces, watching people slowly remember how to trust, how to breathe, how to hope, I realized the opposite was true. The most powerful changes happen in the dark, in the spaces between words, in the moments where no one is watching and you still choose to stay. Marcus eventually moved into a small apartment. He got a part-time job. He started attending group meetings, not because he was fixed, but because he was ready to try. He still carried the weight, but he no longer carried it alone. And neither did I. I found my own anchors, my own community, my own quiet reasons to keep showing up. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I just needed to know that when someone reached out in the dark, I was willing to reach back. That's when I realized something I'll carry for the rest of my life. We spend so much time waiting for permission to matter, waiting for the right moment, the right title, the right platform, but the truth is simpler. You matter the moment you decide to pause, the moment you choose to see someone instead of looking through them, the moment you give $1, a blanket, a minute, a breath, and ask for nothing in return. That's not charity. That's connection. And connection is the only thing that ever truly saves us. Tell me, what's one quiet choice you can make today that might just change someone's tomorrow? I still keep the coins on my desk. I still drive past that gas station. I still stop at the old bridge when I need to remember why I started. The world hasn't suddenly become kinder. It's still loud. It's still fast. It's still full of people carrying invisible weights, walking through days that feel too heavy to name. But I've learned something crucial. You don't have to fix the world to be part of its healing. You just have to refuse to look away. You just have to stay, even when it's hard. Even when it's quiet. Even when no one notices. Because the ones who do notice, they're the ones who will sit with you when your own streetlight flickers out. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be present. Sometimes the loudest impact comes from the quietest room. Sometimes stopping for $1 at a forgotten gas station isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a lifetime spent remembering that we're all just one moment away from needing someone to see us. And when that moment comes, I hope I'm ready. I hope I'm willing. I hope I'm still here.